Friends, and a warm welcome to this webinar on responsible financing in forest and agro commodities sector. And here we have speakers from WWF India, and this webinar will be for 2 hours. As you know, there are very interesting aspects to be covered today: agriculture, forestry, and environment at a glance, materiality and risk transmission across agriculture and forest commodities supply chains, ERS metrics and tools for sustainable finance for the sector, strategies for responsible lending through an example of an agro commodity. We have 2 commodities today. I think they are going to discuss about palm oil and turmeric. So as our participants are aware, we have been arranging such webinars, and this is in the same sequence to spread more awareness and to develop skill and preparedness for ESG aspects. So we have bankers with us at senior level and those who are involved in financing to this particular sector today. So with this, thanks to WWF India for coming forward to arrange this webinar today. And I will not take much time. Over to you now, so you can start the webinar. Over to WWF.
Thank you so much, sir. And we would also like to thank IBA for giving us the opportunity to be able to bring together some of the key stakeholders from the financial sector, because this is a very important topic, and we're very grateful that we have this platform to be able to initiate some of these discussions today. And I'm sure we would have some very rich and enriching discussions in the webinar today. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Kamal Prakash Seth from WWF Singapore office. He is the global palm oil lead, and he would be setting the context on which we would be building further in the discussions today. So I would like to, is Kamal, I mean, I can't see him. Kamal. Kamal is on, I can see him in the attendees list. Can he be given the control to be able to unmute and present his screen? Yeah. I think he's
rights, madam, we can access. He has rights, okay. He can continue.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
I think I've got the access for my video and audio. Are you able to hear me well?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And glad to be here. Good evening from Singapore. It's about 5 p.m. here. It's a good Friday evening. And for you, I guess it's the afternoon in India. I'm just checking if I'm able to share my screen as well. I'm just seeing that I do see the option. Are you able to see my screen now? Okay, so let me begin by just saying that for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, it's a very important topic for us to engage with the financial institutions around the world, and definitely in places like India and Singapore, to make sure that everyone understands what are the nature-related risks and opportunities in the agri-commodity financing, especially because many of the commodities traded around the world are linked to deforestation, conversion, and even in some cases, human rights violations. So we have done several studies. So what I'll be doing in the next few minutes is to tell you a bit more about, but probably you know about WWF, needs no introduction in many cases, operates in more than 100 countries, been around since 1961 with more than 5 million members, and projects around the world around wildlife, forest, oceans, freshwater, climate, energy, food, finance, markets, and governance. So we have dedicated expert and specialist teams that work around the world. And what I do personally is within the markets practice, I lead a global palm oil program and closely work with other commodity leads as well. So we'll go through the basic understanding of what are these nature-related risks and opportunities for financial institutions, banks, and investors alike. Then I'll take you through some of the insights from a report that we published last year, Seeing the Forest for the Trees. some highlights from the sustainable banking assessment that we did from our Asia Sustainable Finance team based in Singapore, and then finally with some findings of the financial flow study that we did recently. So the reason we work on this, and you might be aware of the major deforestation that has taken place in especially places like Southeast Asia. This graph tells you about Borneo since 1970s all the way till now, 2017. Most of the deforestation was linked to commodities which were produced in this region, and therefore it led to a huge alarm for risks that then come to the businesses and the investors and the banks that continue to finance them. So that's one of our biggest priorities, to make sure that we are halting deforestation and conversion, not just in Borneo, but in places like Kalimantan and Central Africa, Latin America, and other places as well, and especially for global multinational banks that have exposure across these regions. Uh, in case you didn't know, so the biggest drivers of agriculture-driven deforestation, number one is cattle, followed by oil palm and soy, which keep changing their position from number 2 or 3. And then we have cacao, rubber plantations, coffee, and wood fiber plantation. Everything else is other factors which are driving this deforestation. So as far as our work is concerned, we focus on these 6 commodities that you see on your screen. And then, of course, pulp and paper and timber, we work closely with organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council for that. So food systems are the number one threat to nature because it uses a lot of natural resources like fresh water, causes terrestrial biodiversity loss, also freshwater biodiversity loss. And eventually, one of the key risks that is highlighted in these reports is 80% of global deforestation is driven by food systems at the moment, which is highly unsustainable, causing various disruptions. And the recent pandemic is a classic case when the disruption is to the point that it leads to that contact between the wildlife and the human society, leading to disruptions like the pandemic we had. So the market value estimate is about 11 trillion negative if you look at the consequence of all these negative impact of the current food system. So what our work seeks to do with the financial institution is to make sure how we can bend the curve upwards, because if business as usual continue, there would be no life on earth as we know it. Biodiversity would have declined to the point that there would not be enough food to feed uh, 8 billion of us which are on the planet, and likely to be 10 billion within the century, in the coming decade. So it's as essential as food security. And with the lack of biodiversity, unless we reverse this curve, there will not be enough food produced to even feed the global population. Um, if you're aware of the Global Biodiversity Framework, I was there at Montreal when this historic announcement was made last December, the Kunming-Montreal Declaration, which seeks to protect 30% of Earth's land, oceans, coastal areas, inland and waters, and reduce by $500 billion the annual harmful government subsidies and cut food waste in half. So Target 15 specifically is related to financial institutions and businesses that requires them to disclose their dependencies on nature. Now, national governments, about 196 of them who have signed up to this, are encouraged to have national regulations and laws to then enforce that on the businesses and financial institutions to report their dependencies on nature. And I'm happy to say that at this COP15, or the Biodiversity Convention in Montreal, we had representation from close to 1,000 financial institutions professionals, which is the first of its kind that this convention had ever seen. So it was encouraging to see that the FIs community had come together from around the world, including India, to support this framework and make sure that these risks are highlighted as well as reported upon. So just to connect the dots again to the fact that what we know from science and research is that there can be no net zero pathway, no 1.5-degree world without ending deforestation and conversion. So any banks or FIs that have committed to these targets realize that there is no way to do that unless they are not directly or indirectly financing agriculture or commodities which are linked to deforestation and conversion. So just to bring your attention on the same, if you see on the bottom left of the screen, together with beef and soy, palm oil production contribute to about 40 to 50% of agricultural land use emissions. Therefore, we need to ensure that there are right incentives to engage the farmers across these commodities and the plantation companies on our way to the 1.5-degree pathway. So I won't go into all the details here, but I would really encourage you to go through the slides that will be shared with you if not done so already. But just to wrap up on this point, to say that 80% of the climate mitigation opportunity from the land sector in the next decade comes from avoiding deforestation and conversion. So the 1.5-degree pathway or the net zero pathway is not possible unless we create systemic changes to halt deforestation and conversion and reduce the nature and climate related risks. There is a huge role of certification standards and system, and as the world's largest independent conservation organization, WWF has co-founded organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or the Marine Stewardship Council. And the reason we have done that is because, one, it helps to protect biodiversity and ecosystem and living conditions of communities in palm oil producing and other commodity producing countries. It supports the establishment of sustainable and transparent production, and also demonstrate the confidence to consumers that the products they're consuming are not linked to deforestation or human rights violations. So just to give an example of how we do this and how we work with financial institutions which co-fund or provide us grants or other financial support for these programs, we call it the Protect, Produce, Restore model, in which, with the help of funds that we receive from some of the financial institution, we are able to protect what can be protected. So we identify and conserve the remaining forest, wildlife, and the rivers. We produce through some of the certifications and the standards that I just highlighted, and then restore what can be restored, restoring habitats for ecological connectivity and riparian reserves. So this is a holistic framework that WWF uses with financial institutions and the corporate sector to make sure that everyone recognizes the risks involved in the supply chains and then takes the mitigation measures to make sure that those risks are managed over a period of time. So the outcome that we're expecting with this model is that with progressive policies affecting responsible corporate behavior, government and corporate engagement with civil society can lead to that innovation at the ground level. So just to take you through three of the key research initiatives that we have had in the last 12 months. The first one is called the Seeing the Forest for the Trees. It's a practical guide for FIs to take action against deforestation and conversion. And so in this report, we are highlighting the risks posed to financial institutions by what we call DCF, or deforestation and conversion free, and provides practical guidance on how FIs can eliminate these risks from their portfolio. So I'll just give you a broad overview, and I'll give you the link so that you can go through the report later on when you have some time. So this report goes into highlighting why financial institutions need to care, because they can be a driver of change, and they're also highly exposed to the impact of deforestation and ecosystem conversion and associated human rights risks. So there are physical risks which are highlighted in this report, the material destruction from the impact deforestation and ecosystem conversion have, leading to losses in businesses and in turn the financial institution that support or invest in them. Then it highlights the system risks, which are risks to the entire system breakdown. I mentioned about the lack of food security that will be the outcome unless there is a biodiversity decline, which is reversed. And then it also highlights the transition risk, because not all the on-ground initiatives we have leads to the outcome in the short term. So there needs to be a transition period and funds related to that transition period, so that the financial impact resulting from policy measures or other changes like changing consumer preferences, people asking for deforestation-free products, for example, are aimed at reversing deforestation and ecosystem conversion. So there is no pathway to net zero, as I said, without protecting and restoring nature, and making it critical that financial institutions address their exposure to deforestation and conversion if they are to meet their bold net zero emission commitments. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with the GFANs, or the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero targets. So it goes into the 5 steps for financial institution to take to eliminate these risks. So FIs can take these steps. Step number 1, understand the material risks. So before being able to take action effectively, FIs must develop a clear understanding of its risk profile. Number 2, develop a deforestation and conversion-free policy, which is aligned with your net zero pathway or with the climate mitigation measures that you have. So the next step is to develop a policy that effectively targets these risks and ensures sufficient breadth, and including a credible target and setting clear expectations for clients and investees. Step 3 is to conduct due diligence and monitoring progress. Step 4 is engaging with the clients and the investees. And in this, we encourage early engagement, which is highly essential to support clients and investees in their journey. So we are not promoting for any exits or blacklisting. What we generally encourage is a transition period in which you have that expectations with your clients or investee companies, and give them a transition roadmap and clear targets on what would lead to that mitigation of risk that you have identified in your portfolio. And finally, to report transparently across stock exchanges, regulators, and other institutions, or in your sustainability reports or annual reports. We encourage FIs to regularly report transparently and ensure that the recognition for their progress being made generates pressure on other financial institutions to eliminate deforestation, conversion, and climate-related risks from their supply chain. So just to wrap up on this, here's the link that you can use to access the full version of this report. So there is an opportunity to profit commercially from the investments in the protection and restoration of key landscapes, and it's larger than it has ever been. I won't go into the details. I think if you're listening to this, you're very much familiar with the rising opportunity in products like green bonds or sustainable fund investments that should be in your key priority areas. So take you through quickly the sustainable banking assessments. It was focused on 54 banks across 11 countries, 76 ESG indicators, and 3 sectors. Specific assessments were done for palm oil, energy, and seafood, and there were 104 sector-specific indicators that we used for this one. So again, you can access the report online on the WWF Singapore website in this case. And the summary of the findings, just to highlight a few, more Asian banks made their commitment to achieve net zero, financed emissions by 2050, and increasing from 15% of the assessed banks in 2021 to 39% in 2022. However, banks still need to expand their capacity to manage nature-related risks. Our assessments observe that while banks are recognizing the nature-related risk, this recognition is not reflected in the bank's client expectation and the policies, and that's where the missing piece is right now. So it needs to be explained and understood and agreed with the investing companies and the clients of the bank. So the laggard banks are losing momentum because this is splitting the playing field, while leading banks continue to enhance their ENS risk management policies and processes during 2022. There is still a wide variation in assessed banks' ENS integration performance, both across the region and within most countries. And regulators are uniquely positioned to raise the bar and level the playing field by both aligning and enhancing the ESG risk management requirements throughout the supply chain. Few more findings from this assessment. So banks need to improve their supply chain traceability for palm oil and other soft commodities. The palm sector policies for banks assessed typically do not cover clients across the entire value chain. We have seen there is a lot of focus on the upstream players, the plantation companies, whereas the downstream players, who are some of the biggest buyers of palm oil products, are not held to the same high standards that the plantation companies are held towards, even though they are the biggest clients of the plantation companies. So that needs to be taken care of as well. And the banks need to expand their capacity to manage nature-related risks. So these are just some of the findings. And I think you can go through the details on how banks and FIs in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and the other Asian countries have been assessed in this framework. I don't think for this one there was a significant focus on Indian FIs, but there's a good case study to understand how banks in other countries or assessed in other countries have performed in this assessment. So the key recommendations from this: banks need to be ready for the upcoming wave of nature risk standards, targets, and reporting. As I said, governments, 196 countries that committed to the global biodiversity framework, will now be in the coming years coming up with regulations. Different ministries will be involved: Ministry of Finance, of course, but also the Ministry of Forest, Environment, Climate Change, and Agriculture, which will be encouraged to have regulations agreed as per the GBF. So identify and understand the risk, develop an effective policy to manage the nature-related risk, and set up processes and monitor progress, ideally before the regulations take force. And just to wrap up on the last segment on the financial flows, in which we asked who is financing the palm oil buyers. This is for the downstream palm oil buyers. So they're the same companies, the usual Fortune 500 companies, which are consumer goods manufacturers or retailers. We did this study because, as I said, there was a lot of focus and scrutiny on the upstream players, on the plantation companies and the processors and the traders, while easy loans and easy investments were given to downstream companies, which are the biggest clients of the same upstream players. So we wanted to go into the details of the FMCGs and the retailers and see what kind of financing they were receiving and under what conditions. So yeah, these were the 4 objectives. We use the palm oil buyer scorecard that WWF has had since the last 15 years almost now. It gets updated every few years, and we analyze the types of finance attracted by the key palm oil supply chain actors. So You might think that these are not the usual suspects because we focused on the FMCGs and the retailers who are the biggest buyers of palm oil from the processors, traders, refiners, and the plantation companies. Eventually, to identify the FIs that have the potential to drive a shift towards a more sustainable palm oil supply chain. But the same companies, as I said, are some of the biggest buyers of other commodities as well. So we use different methodologies, tools, databases. I won't go into the details. This is just for your reference. On the creditor side, we use different databases like Refinitiv, Bloomberg, and others. And on the investor side, we use Emacs, Profundo's pension fund portfolio, and so on and so forth. I guess I'm done with my time. So just if you allow me a few minutes, or I will be happy to take questions later on as well. Can I have a couple of minutes more, Sanjana, if that's okay?
Yeah, I think that'll be fine. We're well on time.
Okay. So just trying to not rush through this. So we looked at forest and finance for this research methodology for policy. We are trying to assess which financial institutions have progressive policies, which are the ones which are lagging behind. So 35 assessment criteria were created, including ESG. And we looked at the forest and finance policy assessments for this report. We also looked at the Forest 500 report, which I highly encourage you to have a look as well. So full scores were given to companies whose policies covered the entire supply chain, which is the missing piece that we have found through this report. So in this, what we found is that 75% of the credit to the downstream companies that buy palm oil come from 5 countries. And they are, of course, the usual suspects: 45% North America, 42% Europe, and 11% Asia. So as I was saying, the focus on commodities is a lot in the global south, whereas the investments and the credits are coming from the global north, as you see here. And 91% of the investments just came from 7 countries. And therefore, these countries, whether it's the US or the European Union or the UK, we work with stakeholders in those countries to make sure that supply chains across the world of those companies, including in India, are adhering to the same standards that the US operations or the UK operations are, because at the end of the day, the headquarters are in the global north, and they need to execute and implement those policies across their supply chain across the countries. These are the top creditors, who are the large US banks: JP Morgan and BOA, and Citigroup are the top 3. And then we have HSBC, BNP, and you see the whole list here in this report that we have published. So this tells you about the exposure and the portfolio value of how much credits are going out to the companies that we have assessed, which are, and this value is obviously not just for buying palm oil, but this value is entirely going to the companies that they are investing or giving loans to. And then whether these banks or that have given those loans, they have strong ESG guidance for those companies as well, is what we are questioning. These are the top recipients mix of the sector. So these are the biggest receivers of the loans and the credits that came from the list that you saw earlier. We mapped this against our palm oil buyer scorecard. So the scorecard is up to 24 points, 24 being the highest. So we saw that the average portfolio performance of most of the banks are what we call the middle of the pack. So if you look at JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Rabobank, the average score is 11 out of 24, 13 out of 24, or 14 out of 24. What this tells you is that the loans are still going to the companies from these banks, which are still don't have across the supply chain ESG implementation, in which these banks are holding the upstream clients accountable for higher standards compared to the downstream, who are performing in the middle of the pack as far as our scorecard is concerned. As far as the investors are concerned, 9 of the top 10 investors are US-based asset managers. You see the ones on this list. And the Norwegian government pension fund, the largest pension fund globally, is also here and part of this mix. So these are the biggest investors who are investing in the companies that we assess, which is 227 multinational corporations, which are buyers of the commodities around the world. And these are the biggest receivers. These are the investing companies from the investors. As you see on the list here, they are obviously buying multiple commodities that have different exposure to risk, nature-related, biodiversity-related, or climate-related. So what we are now trying to map here in this case is what was the performance of these companies where these investors were investing in. So if you look at, for example, in the case of BlackRock, if $309 billion were invested in 96 companies, the average score on our scorecard of those 96 companies is 13 out of 24, meaning to say that the risk is quite significant for a BlackRock investing in these 96 companies, because those companies are not performing higher on our scorecard based on sustainability criteria for sustainable purchases of commodities like palm oil. And then in this, you will see the research finding related to the policy research and how the banks and the investors have performed from different research reports that we refer to in this study. So overall findings for policy, creditors have better policies due to the nature of the relationship. Investors lack the policies due to fewer incentives. Improvements with the UNPRI plus increase the relations between shareholdings and ESG risk. Palm oil policy must apply from up to downstream. As I mentioned, same applies for soy, rubber, cacao, coffee. So when I say palm, I'm referring to pretty much all the commodities in the supply chain and the portfolio of these FIs. Certain elements in the finances policies are more common. So commodity specific policy, free, prior, informed consent, transparency, grievance mechanisms are some common linkages that we see. The ones which are missing are labor and gender consideration with the financial institutions and in the ESG guidelines. So FI transparency on forest impacts and corporate engagement abide by the spirit of tax laws, corruption and bribery, concession. These are the ones that we found missing in the policies of these financial institutions. With that, I think I'll stop for now, and thank you so much for allowing the time for me to present this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamal. And I think that's a great comprehensive context setting, and we'll be building on some of these conversations. So, we have Aloka with us as well, who is the head of corporate sustainability at HSBC, who will be sharing some global experiences and learnings in responsible financing of agricultural commodities. So I would like to invite her to shed some light on these aspects as well. Aloka. Aloka, can you hear us? Okay, in the meanwhile, I think we can take a few questions before, I think there's some technical issues where, we can figure that out. But in the meantime, we can take a few questions. There's a question in the chat box by Dharnish, who has asked that, can you throw some light on the Indian banks which have implemented ESG practices? Kamal, would you want to share some insight on that?
Yes, and I would, it will be great if Aloka is able to speak, because one of the banks that we can highlight is actually HSBC, and Aloka will be in a better position to speak to that. So there are banks in India that are operating like HSBC, Rabobank is being the other one, Standard Chartered being the other. Just from the top of my head, these are the banks which have headquarters in other parts of the world. So they are deploying their ESG guidelines and policies to put it simply, saying that the loans provided to a company that is buying palm oil will be provided if they are certified by the RSPO, for example, or if they're certified by the FSC. So they hold their clients accountable to high standards at the plantation level, but also across the supply chain. We have not seen instances so far of the Indian public sector banks having such stringent risk management done, but we have seen that from the multinational banks which are operating in India for sure. Long way to go, but just wanted to keep it short, that the Indian banks can look at the multinational banks in India as a benchmark on how they are managing the ESG risk across their portfolio.
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. So while Aloka is joining, I think there's some technical issues at her end. We've just confirmed with her she's joining. In the meanwhile, we can, there was one more question. Please feel free to add in more questions in the chat box. But in the meanwhile, can you also enlist some steps that a bank who's at a very early stage, at a nascent stage in their sustainability journey can take in order to address some of the deforestation-linked commodities and the risks pertaining to them in their portfolios? And what do you think are some of the roles that the non-financial disclosures can play in this?
That's a very good question. And those are the 5 steps that I highlighted. So I highly encourage everyone to read the report, Seeing the Forest for the Trees, because it clearly goes one by one. It's a step-by-step guide on what a financial institution needs to do. And as I mentioned earlier, the first step is definitely to understand the material risk. So there are various ways to do it. There is a science-based targets network. There is a science-based target initiative. Organizations like WWF have in-house experts that you can make use of course, because we sit on the steering committee of the science-based targets initiatives and networks. And of course, we are all here to support the financial institutions in this transition. So the first step is to talk to the experts, talk to the people who understand these risks, and then join some of these multi-stakeholder forums that are even available in India now. So I'm sure WWF India team can guide on the sustainable finance initiatives that you have planned, and that could help the FI begin the journey on understanding the risk in the first place and then mapping it after that. So happy to provide any support from our end in Singapore on that as well.
Yeah, that's true, Kamal. That does help. I'm sure that has helped Dharnesh in understanding what can be done. There's another question from Rishikesh on understanding how the palm oil policy ensures traceability and transparency in supply chains in order to prevent involvement of intermediaries in illegal activities or human rights abuses, if there's any.
Another very good question. So we call it chain of custody. What it means is that if you've been following the news, there is the European Union deforestation regulation, which is the first of its kind, in which the European Union market is saying that they will not allow any products to be placed in the EU market unless you can prove that it is free from deforestation and conversion. What that means is that if there is chain of custody, let's say that an importer in India, in Gujarat or in Mumbai is importing a commodity like palm oil, will need to then prove that that commodity that came from somewhere in Malaysia or Indonesia did not come from a deforested area. It's actually a very straightforward requirement saying that India is the biggest buyer of palm oil in the world and biggest buyer of soybean oil in the world, would then tell the exporting countries that because we are committed to net zero targets and we are committed to nature and climate goals, we would like you as the supplying country to India to prove that you're not supplying us deforestation linked or human rights linked. And the way to do it is a traceability mechanism. So standards that are referred to already provided. So the FSC provides it, the RSPO provides it. Any given credible sustainability standard provides this chain of custody in which it's mapped digitally. There's some work which is happening on that front as well called traceability to plantation or origin, but there are already the standards out there who have this chain of custody. So in which a bank is telling the client that if you wish to receive X loan for X terms, you also need to make sure that in X year you will be fully traceable in your supply chain, which means all that you buy is certified sustainable in the best case scenario.
Thanks, Kamal. Just would like to take a second to see if Aloka has been able to join. Okay. So there's another question. I'm glad that people are asking questions and the chat box is quite active. Someone wants to know that agriculture contributes more than 30% of India's emissions. So what are we seeing on the policy front on agri decarbonization? And also if there are any developments on the policy front on the carbon sink, if that is something that you would also like to address, Kamal.
I think there are other experts in the room and other speakers after me who could elaborate further on it. I think one thing I can highlight for sure is that for India at least, and I spent pretty much all my life before moving to Singapore, is the worry is not really so much on deforestation and conversion. The worry is more about the productivity of the land. So just look at the case of palm oil, for example. When countries like Malaysia and Indonesia produce 4 metric tons on the same hectare of land, oil palm farmers in India only produce 1 metric ton on that same piece of land. It's 4 times less, which means that for some reason, the sustainable agriculture practices from our own nearby countries have not been adopted in Indian condition, which is not very difficult. It's about education and training and capacity building. And again, organizations like WWF are already doing that in places like Andhra Pradesh. So I think in India, the question is, how do we transition to sustainable agriculture practices to produce more with less, because the worry is not so much on deforestation. It's more about we have to feed 1.4 billion people, plus we are exporting food commodities or food products around the world. But the productivity is very low still. So there needs to be a comprehensive training and capacity building program for the farmers in India so that they can do more with less. With the same hectare or the same acre of land, they're able to produce more. And I think one of the champion countries or governments in this is the Netherlands. Is a classic case. It's called the fruit basket of the world or the flower basket of the world. On very limited agricultural land, over the years, they have upgraded the productivity. And I think the Dutch embassy in New Delhi that I was working with previously also is doing a lot of initiatives with the government of India to increase the farmers' productivity and the farm productivity. So just few things I could highlight, but I imagine other speakers after me will have more to say on this.
Thanks, Kamal. So Aloka has joined. Can I request IBA to please give her the access to unmute and share her screen? So I would like to, I can see that she has the access in the control now. So I would like to invite Aloka, who is the head of corporate sustainability at HSBC, to share some global experiences and lessons in responsible financing of agricultural commodities.
Sure. Thank you so much, and apologies for the delay in joining. I had some technical issue. So I think what I'll focus on is, the palm oil piece. And because this is one thing that we've been working on globally, and with large operations in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, that became almost like an imperative for us to work on this entire piece. I think everybody is aware of the fact that the impact of palm oil cultivation in these two countries, and as a result of which, I think the natural thing was to look at sustainable palm oil. What we realized in this entire process, and of course we have been one of the core supporters and core, you can say, founders along with the WWF, or a core partner in that RSPO journey. In terms of what we have done is, of course, in these two countries, the focus has largely been on cultivation, because that's where the entire piece is. The challenges that we have faced is, of course, in the traceability piece. We realized that, the traceability of this entire piece is a very complex one. And RSPO was, of course, a journey in terms of improving the tools, etc., for creating a traceability tool for the entire value chain. And that's the work that's happened. I think we are now at a stage where we are working with just not the countries which are producing palm oil, but also countries which are importing palm oil. And India, being a very large importer of palm oil, we have also embarked on a plan to work on sustainable palm oil when it comes to procuring or importing palm oil from outside of India. And the three things that we have been working is, one is, of course, we realize that the palm oil production in India is naturally, it's much lower. It's a very small part of that is done. But in our work with RSPO, and Kamal is also on the call, what we realized in the entire process, speaking with organizations who both import palm oil as well as people who are producing palm oil, we realized that the production piece, there are lots of policies in place at the state level. If I'm taking the state of Andhra Pradesh, for example, we have realized that there are a lot of things which are already in place. So therefore, customizing the tool, RSPO tool, becomes that much more easier. So that was a learning for us, because I think the policies were very much in favor of the smallholder farmers, and as a result of which, it became that much more easier for us to see that, to integrate and to create a customized tool for India for certification is definitely a very doable and a much more, I would say, easier process, because a lot of things are already in place. Having said so, besides we also spoke with the government along with WWF and RSPO, and what we realized that there was a lot of positive feedback from the government. They were exploring, of course, wanting to know more about certified palm oil. And of course, the two things. One is, of course, what kind of certification is available. across the globe. Also, there were discussions in terms of whether there can be a country level certification for the for palm oil. That was another discussion that happened, and we've also seen in other markets like Malaysia and Indonesia, there is RSPO, but there's a lot of collaboration, and there are some state certified palm oil as well. So that there are different certifications that's being developed. We see this as a positive thing because at the end of the day, more players coming into the market and creating practical solutions for this, we see that as a positive step. The last point is beyond the production piece. I think the other things that we have started work along with WWF in India, one is of course the corporate engagement piece, because I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the awareness piece, and we've been working with companies representing 30% of India's palm oil consumption. And we've tried to see that they take some concrete actions that increase commitment to an uptake of any kind of certified palm oil. That's one piece of work that we've done. The second piece I mentioned about is the consumer awareness piece. It's a smaller piece today, but we see value in this, and we've seen countries like China doing doing quite a lot of work in this space, getting to the consumers getting to know about sustainable palm oil. And the third piece I've already spoken about, which is the sustainable productions piece. In this piece, I think government will be a very, very important stakeholder. We have seen a lot of progress in the past couple of years in terms of discussions both with producers who procure as well as the government in this space. And also, I think we've been able to make some good inroads into the India FMCG companies. That's something that we jointly with WWF, that's something that we have been able to do. So I think I'll stop here and hand over for any other comments, questions you have.
Thanks, Aloka. We have some time and we can take a few questions. So I will request all the participants and attendees to share some questions in the chat box, and we can take them up one by one. While participants are putting in their questions, I see there's a question here. So Shrikant wants to know that other than palm oil, what other major products can we focus on?
Yeah, I think from a commodities perspective, I think purely from HSBC's perspective, we are also looking at cotton. When it comes to sustainable cotton and certified cotton. And why so is because we've seen that again India is the largest exporter of cotton, and we've seen that the organizations which buy cotton for if you take an Inditex or if you take any others, they have made very large commitments to procure sustainable cotton. Now India and China being the largest exporters, naturally there will be pressure to create sustainable cotton or certified cotton for the large buyers from across the world to take it. So that's another commodity that we are working on when it comes to certified or sustainable cotton, as we would call it. Of course, there are others which we are not working on, and WWF will be able to share more, whether it's rubber and others. But from HSBC's perspective, these are the two that we are focusing on.
Maybe, Sanjana, I could just add on that to break a myth, actually. A lot of time, financial institutions and corporate players think that they could substitute one commodity with the other without realizing the risk that will increase. So classic cases of palm prices going up or down, leading to importers buying soybean oil, which from our experience as we work as much on soy and rubber as well, is way behind the sustainable palm oil sector right now, meaning to say that if anyone switches from palm to soy, is worse for the planet and worse for people right now, because the journeys have been very different for the soy sector in this case, which India imports from Argentina and Brazil mostly. So I just want to break that myth that from a sustainability point of view, the palm sector has progressed much higher compared to the soy, rubber, and other sectors. And there are a lot of factors for it. We can go into it, but there is the perception that needs to change also, that it's not just palm oil which has driven deforestation or driving it. The other sectors are as much or more driving the deforestation. So moving from one to the other is not really a smart decision from a business or a nature point of view as well.
Although in Indian context, actually, could we say that even rice cultivation is a major source of diversion of EAC, and then it is a cause for concern. It consumes so much of water, and I think even sugarcane is the next biggest commodity in India.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to highlight, while we have taken very specific interest in these two because on the certification piece, but you're absolutely right that when you take agriculture at large, the water piece, as when it comes to India, I think that's something that we are looking at, taking at crops which are our major crops and actually looking at water consumption through that, because we do have a major stress on water when it comes to agriculture. So from that aspect, but so the only thing there we have seen looked at it from the lens of water availability or how to use it in the best possible manner. What are the practices that can, have better yields, etc. But from a certification piece, we have just looked at these two, palm oil and cotton, as of now.
So I would like to come here because you raised the question of sugarcane. As an organization, WWF is working on sugar as well. We are abiding to bone sucrose standards, which was initially developed with the support from WWF. On cotton, we are working on better cotton initiative standards. So these are two quite widely accepted standard in these two commodities. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, there's another question. So someone wants to know if fair trade certification is common in India. If either, I think Luca, if you would want to take this up.
I think what I'll do is, my knowledge is limited. I know that fair trade has a very robust presence in India, not today, but for many years. And I know that, when it comes to textile and others, there have been a lot of work in that area. But from more technical perspective, I will request maybe WWF to give any background that they have.
Yeah, I think, that's something that we can get into at a deeper level from a WWF point of view. But we also wanted to understand some of the business implications of sector-specific policies, like the certifications that you talked about, for agriculture in emerging economies like India. And what are some of the lessons that can be learned? If you can shed some light on that.
I think from my end, what we have seen is that certificate, if you ask me that, what are the kind of challenges that one is facing? So when from a financier's point of view, any kind of certification or actually there's a cost to it. So there are two ways of looking at it. One is, of course, from the production side, and some of the work that we have done with both RSPO as well as WWF. The challenge lies, for example, I'm taking palm oil as an example. Now, a farmer who's producing palm oil and is required to do sustainable palm oil or certified palm oil, there is a cost to it. And we really don't have policies which say that, that price is going to be guaranteed to the farmer. So that's where the big challenge lies, and therefore and this is not just for palm oil, any certified product, that's a challenge. So therefore, a policy push kind of always helps. The second is, of course, awareness, as I mentioned. The second challenge that we have seen in this particular space is, of course, the entire traceability piece that I spoke about, and that's something which, of course, it evolves and it gets better. And there are organizations just like RSPO and WWF, WWF's Better Cotton or RSPO's Sustainable Palm Oil things. They've worked for many years to kind of fine tune the tools, but because the complex nature of the value chain, it's a tough thing. And so, therefore, I think that's one piece which kind of will evolve and continue to improve when it comes to traceability tools for these purposes. So these are the two points that we wanted to highlight. And I think from a purely financing perspective, if I think the pricing is the biggest thing that we are currently figuring it out. And for example, in cotton, what we are trying to see is that if somebody comes with some blended finance opportunities, if it's possible, because for example, partial guarantee, etc., certain things that one is looking at in terms of to do a pilot and see that how that works. But at the initial stages, some guarantees, etc., does help before it gets completely mainstreamed from the financing perspective.
Thanks, Aloka. There is one more interesting question which either you or Kamal could take up. Someone wants to know that if there are any likely implications of the recently adopted EU deforestation-free regulation. So I mean, either one of you, if you would want to.
Maybe I could take that, Aloka. Yes. Well,
I think bank will have a different perspective, so both of you can answer this.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'll just answer it, given WWF was behind that along with other 200 plus organizations on this policy working with the governments. So the first implication is quite clear that there are a lot of companies that operate in India as well as the European Union, and those companies, multinationals, will have global policies for sustainable sourcing or traceable sourcing. So what applies to the EU would also apply for the operations in India. So if they're manufacturing anything in India that goes to the EU market, would have to comply with the same requirements. Because at the end of the day, they need to prove traceability to origin, that anything that entering the market, whether it comes through India or it's re-exported from India, would have to be, would need to prove that it's not related to deforestation. So I think the multinationals that operate in the EU and India have the same requirements pretty much. But maybe Aloka, you want to add further on that?
Yeah, I think it's connected to what Kamal just mentioned. The fact is that today you have most companies, their supply chain, in many cases their customers, etc. You literally operate in an ecosystem where you have both domestic and international connect, and as a result of which we see that as and also the fact is that most companies today, for them, ESG is becoming a very, very important factor, driving factor. If you take India in itself, you have today the first 1,000 listed companies, they have to do the BRSR reporting as well. So there is a huge amount of focus on sustainability within the organization. So if you're taking up any company for that matter, they will have to work on their entire sustainability process, be it their supply chain, be it their procurement process, whom they're procuring from, etc. So from the relevance point of view, I think this is something which will have to be integrated into the overall strategy of the company. I think we would call it transition. I think that sustainability transition for any organization is going to be it's becoming more and more what do you call it? I mean, in India alone, you have so many policies today which are being introduced, and we've seen that what RBI is working on a huge amount of climate related stuff, and there are a lot of policies which are being rolled out. All these policies are actually ensuring that the companies actually look at it with a very serious lens. So from that perspective, deforestation, wherever an organization has a link for any deforestation related procurement or product, etc., it will become important for them, and so for the financiers as well. Because we are also going to look at financing these companies, we are also going to look at their sustainability transition plan in the coming days. And that's how the financial sector is also moving.
Thank you, Aloka. Are there any more questions? We have a couple of minutes. Okay, so I do not see any other questions in the chat box. I would like to thank both Kamal and Aloka for setting the context and sharing some incredible insights on financing in the agro forestry sector. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences and valuable insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Mr. Rijit Singh Gupta, who is the CEO at Center for Responsible Business, and Mr. Saurajit Iyer, Vice President for Sustainable Finance and Climate Strategy at Optus ESG, to share their insights on mitigating potential ESG and natural capital risks in financing agro commodities in India. Over to you, both of you, please.
Thank you, Sanjana, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to WWF and to IBA for hosting this very engaging and very critical conversation. My name is Rijit, as Sanjana has introduced, and I work for an organization called the Center for Responsible Business, which works on sustainable business issues across different sectors, commodities, including oil palm. And I'm here with my colleague Shorajit from Octus ESG, and together we are going to talk about a tool that we have created to start a conversation about how to mitigate climate-related risks in agri-commodity finance with a specific reference to oil palm. And I'm also going to, if you allow, sort of put the link of that publication in the chat box for the participants to look at subsequently. So the linkage between the expansion of agriculture commodities and the implication on nature and people and climate has already been highlighted, and we don't want to sort of belabor it. So it is very clear that there is that critical link between expansion of commodities and the implication on people, nature, and climate. And as Kamal and Aloka have already mentioned, there is a fair bit happening globally, especially by the financial institutions and investors on sort of mitigating those negative implications on climate and nature. Colleagues would be aware of the task force on climate-related financial disclosure, which has now been elevated to the task force on nature-related financial disclosure. And we understand there's also a task force on inequality-related financial disclosure. So the financial sector, whether they are banks, financial institutions, are being looked at as a very important player in supporting this transition towards a better tomorrow and a more sustainable tomorrow. So that's happening at a global level. And I think our esteemed speakers have already spoken about a lot of those trends, and it's also clear to many of the participants who are here today. I'm going to sort of, and what I and Shorajit are going to do is to double click and sort of zoom into India. So in India also, we can take pride in the fact that we've had for the last 11, 12 years been driving the movement towards sustainable business, especially in which the Ministry of Corporate Affairs took leadership with the development of the National Voluntary Guidelines on Social, Economic, and Environmental Responsibilities of Business, which was referred to as NVGs. And they didn't stop there. They also got the SEBI, the market regulator, to take interest in it and make it mandatory at that point of time for top 100 companies by market cap. And as you're all aware, over the period of the last 10 years, this has also gone through revisions and refinements. And now we have the BRSR, the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Framework, which is mandatory for top 1,000 companies by market cap. So top 1,000 and likely to be expanded is what we understand from colleagues in the corridors in Delhi. However, it is not just the Ministry of Corporate Affairs that has been involved in this process. As recently as 2 years ago, the Ministry of Finance also set up, as some of you would be aware, a task force on sustainable finance. And essentially, the idea was to see how a sustainable finance-related framework can be developed for India, specifically highlighting the fact that there is a lot of confusion and lot of language and lot of expressions being talked about globally. We need a unified and a common language for the project owners and also for the investors. And that was essentially the taxonomy on sustainable activities. And happy to share that as our colleagues from the Indian Banks Association are very well aware that there is a fair bit of traction with the taxonomy related process, and hopefully because India is hosting the G20, we can expect that this year the report of the sustainable taxonomy, at least if not the sustainable finance task force, would be released. So that really highlights that the Indian financial institution is not sort of isolated or not inactive player at all as far as sustainability is concerned. As Aloka mentioned, BRSR, or the Responsible Business Reporting Framework, is also applicable on financial institutions. And if you look at the last list of top 1,000 companies by market cap of June 2022, you will see that in the top 100 there are 9 banks. So these banks have that responsibility in the mandate to disclose what they're doing on sustainable, to promote sustainability. Now, RBI has also been taking a fair bit of interest by becoming a member of the Network for Greening the Financial System, or NGFS. And of course, the details of the NGFS for India will be rolled out, and they will be, of course, they will also be, sort of oriented and socialized with the Indian banking institutions. But RBI has, through various initiatives, has already highlighted that the Indian financial institutions will have and will continue to play a very key role in supporting the transition to low carbon economy and supporting the national climate commitments. The RBI Deputy Governor in December last year has mentioned, and I quote, given its wide-ranging economic and financial implications, climate-related financial risks are already engaging the attention of international standard-setting bodies, central banks, and supervisors globally, with the focus on the need to promote the transition to a sustainable global economy. Last year, there was also a discussion paper which RBI came up with on climate risk and sustainable finance, and also active engagement with the Indian banking institutions have taken place. So one of the areas now, we've talked about a lot of things about what banks in India could do and can do and have been doing. And the topic for today is essentially oil palm or palm oil, whichever way, it's still the same commodity. And why should the Indian financial institution look at oil palm out of the various different options that it has in terms of sectors, in terms of commodities, to promote sustainable business in India, or to show leadership in sort of addressing the nature and climate related risks that are material to India? What is that business case? Now, a little bit about the oil palm sector. As you are aware, many of you are, that the amount of oil palm that we use in India, 95 to 97% of that is imported. Only about 2 to 3% is something that we produce domestically in India. So when we speak to financial institutions, and we've been doing this for a while, it is very evident that the business case is pretty weak for the cross jurisdictional, something which is happening in the rainforests of Southeast Asia. We have much more complex and more urgent challenges on sustainability to deal with in our own country. So the business case is not very strong. However, last year, the government of India, well, in 2021, the government of India has come up with a national policy on edible oil, the specific focus on oil palm called the NMEO-OP. And there is a huge amount of interest, especially through the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, to expand the domestic oil palm production area in India to about 10 lakh hectares from the 3.5 lakh hectares that is currently under production, covering about 14 states. So 650,000 hectares of land covering 14 states, as we speak, are being deployed for production of oil palm. And there we feel the business case becomes a little bit more material and a little bit more granular for Indian financial institutions, because as Aloka and as Kamal was saying, there are issues pertaining to water, there are issues pertaining to natural resources, soil, workers, all of these which are very, very critical. So going forward, what we realized is that the financial institutions in India will play a much more active role, perhaps in looking at this domestic program and policy on oil palm, and might want to be associated with those projects which are being commissioned as we speak across those states. You know, new companies coming up, new mills are being are likely to come up, and plantations are being promoted, nurseries and so on and so forth. So all of that needs money, and that money is going to come from the financial institutions. So therefore, there will definitely be a much bigger role of the financial institution in promoting and supporting the national domestic production of oil palm. And therein we feel that if the financial institutions can look at a framework which will help them in both addressing the risk and also creating value, that would be quite exciting. And that is where the framework or the practitioner's guide that we have developed together with Octus comes in, or could come in as handy. And I would now like to suggest and give it over to Shorajit, who's much more experienced in the financial sector than I am, to talk about and give you a brief orientation about this practitioner's toolkit. I didn't use the slides that I thought I would use, but I thought this context setting could be done lucidly much better. So over to you, Shorajit, if you want to use the slides. I think we have sharing rights, or Sanjana, how would you?
I think we have sharing rights if you want to.
Sanjana or Rajat, if you could share the slide.
I can share, no problem. I can share, no problem.
So, thanks, Rajat. Maybe I'll start off while you're sharing the screen. And greetings to all colleagues from IBA, WWF, and other institutions. So I am Saurajit Iyer from Octus ESG. We run sustainable finance, ESG, and climate risk advisory company, Indian born and bred, but working with organizations across emerging markets in Asia, Pacific, Africa, and South America. I'll take about 9 to 10 minutes maybe to go through the business case for looking at these particular emerging risks, and I'll talk a bit on the guidance evaluation framework that we have developed for financial institutions that Rajat was talking about, which would facilitate better evaluation of sustainable agro-commodity proposals, and hence channelize more capital towards these green avenues. Now, in this context, I want to first stress two things. First is that this is really from the point of view of agro commodities in general rather than palm oil in particular. And that's simply because we wanted to keep the canvas open in terms of the sort of portfolio that typical Indian financial institutions would be engaging with. The second piece I want to stress is that the reason you need to look at this is because you need to ask yourself, is it an intrinsic risk that will impact you in India? And it's not just about, we need to talk about it because the world is talking about it. That's a fair reason. But really, is it an intrinsic risk that will eventually impact you in India? That's really the question in context of this guidance document that maybe we want you to ponder upon. Let's move to the next slide, please, on the business case to look at these risks. So, yeah. I hope the slides are visible in, is it on full screen mode?
The slides are visible, but yeah, Rajat, can you make it a slideshow? Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, till now, we've been speaking about the risks related to climate change, deforestation, land use degradation, and that these have a negative impact on overall business and financial performance down the line. So let's take a quick look at how these risks are actually transmitted through the financial and business ecosystems using the channels set out by BCBS, which is the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. So what typically happens is at the first level, while these risks impact the overall macroeconomy in terms of impact on GDP, inflation, price rise, etc., at a more specific or micro or granular level, the transmission channels lead to damage to physical assets and distribution network on one hand, and disruption to business continuity and human productivity on the other hand. So these are the two main, let's call it damage and disruption functions that happen. Now this in turn at the next level impacts what we call the business value drivers of any company. So essentially your metrics like revenue, OPEX, CAPEX, profit margin, cost of capital, and so on. And once those are getting impacted at the level after that, it leads to financial risk issues around debt servicing ability, asset repricing, illiquid conditions for fundraising, stoppage of operations, and so on, which in turn then connects to the conventional financial risks of a bank, typically credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, operational risk, and so on. Moving to the next slide. So in the next slide, we have basically summarized the 4 levels of the practitioner's guidance framework that we chalked out for financial institutions to better evaluate projects around sustainable agro commodities. So, Octus ESG, CRB, RSPO, we work to create this particular framework for financial institutions, essentially so that they can better identify, analyze, and mitigate these emerging risks from having a financial risk impact and hitting their books. Now, it's aimed to act as a guidance. I stress on the word guidance for financial sector stakeholders. It offers a sort of action points that you can look at for managing these emerging risks in your lending and investing decisions. For ease of comprehension, we've divided the framework into 4 sections that you see on the screen. Governance essentially looks at issues around the oversight and direction from the top at the level of the financial institution. Business strategy looks at how the particular financial institution can align its products, policies, processes to these objectives. Risk management looks at identifying and monitoring potential issues as part of the credit assessment process. And the disclosures and metrics looks at setting targets and tracking and reporting on that progress. So in a nutshell, it really aims to mobilize more sustainable oriented finance towards sustainable agro commodities, including palm oil. Moving to the next slide, please. Thanks. So governance in a bit more detail. So when we say governance oversight mechanism in context of a sort of a financial criteria or guidance to look at sustainable agro-commodity financing, what we're really talking about are action points like putting in place board oversight mechanisms and structures, because at the end of the day, it's the board and the senior management that holds responsibility to oversee potential risks impacting the portfolio, including how emerging risks can impact conventional risk in its existing ERM frameworks or CAM documents for that matter. Now, there's a need to separate the responsibility of risk oversight versus day-to-day risk management. In short, delineate the two roles. Another criteria in this context is whether technical climate experts are being inculcated at the board level to improve the institution's overall climate competency. And this includes establishing the chain of command and responsibilities very carefully across the organization hierarchy. We also talk about institutionalizing the oversight processes irrespective of, let's say, the CEO or whoever was the senior manager driving sustainability in that organization. Once they move out, often we've seen that the entire conversation on sustainability suddenly falls down the drain. So the idea of institutionalization of processes is stressed here as an evaluation criteria in order to ensure that processes continue irrespective of the person. Next slide, please. So thanks. So moving on, business strategy. Now, strategy is really where when we are evaluating the financial institute, when we are evaluating the sustainable agro commodity and all the, we look at whether these emerging risks are being included in the product's portfolio policies, progress tracker of that particular financial institution or not. That's something they can look at in order to ensure alignment of capital flows with more sustainable investing and climate smart avenues. Now, another part of this is to conduct active engagement with your borrower companies to integrate aspects related to the borrower sustainability policies and progress into the in alignment or to align that with this overall strategy of the financial institution. Now, the need to develop alternate financial products incentives becomes very important here in order to boost financing towards the risk return impact approach, which in our definition is really an extension of the risk return approach. It's not a replacement, it's an extension. And finally, complying with certain specified use of proceeds while raising green capital for, let's say, sustainable agro commodity or sustainable palm oil. Which would then cover various cultivation, sourcing, procurement issues around it. So the use of proceeds, if it is defined properly, that makes it much more easier to raise instruments like green bonds and all for those particular purposes. Next slide, please. Thanks. So on risk management really looks at how the financial institution should approach evaluating these risks at a pre-investment, during investment, and post-investment stages in order to reduce the incidences of transmission of these risks to the conventional financial risks of that institution. Now, this may cover alignment with certain specified standards, certifications. For instance, RSPO has one of the the best certification standards out there for palm oil particularly. It may cover exclusionary screening criteria for non-sustainable agro-commodity financing and try to put in place an ENS management plan to integrate sustainability into the operations and risk rating decisions, and not just keep it as a separate conditionality. Now, it looks at issues around data, it looks at issues around traceability, it looks at issues around monitoring for existing projects or portfolios, for new investments, basically to build credibility in the entire ESG screening process. That's the ultimate goal. And what we also talk about in this section is that the need to conduct a baseline assessment of risk. Now, just to take an example, there's a very popular saying we keep on seeing a lot in sustainability conversations is what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So in case of emissions and climate change, it really starts from understanding what is the level of financed emissions at a particular bank or a financial institution's portfolio, and how much of those financed emissions are really coming from these type of sectors, in this case, agro commodity type of sectors. So, of course, that being said, while all this is at one place, what is also true is that the financial industry would also need a common and harmonious set of evaluation criteria or guidance for palm oil related financing from the regulator side, as a clear guidance of what to do, what not to do, and that would actually go a long way in terms of avoiding inadvertent greenwashing down the line. Next slide, please.
Sir, really sorry to interrupt. We're going a little over time, so can I please request you to...
I'll just take another 30 seconds. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much.
So on the last slide, disclosures and metrics. So the idea here is to stress that mere disclosures is insufficient. It's really how you use the disclosed information towards strategic decision making. So that's really about the integration of ESG disclosure data into your overall strategy. The disclosure and metrics element in the framework covers metrics specific to palm oil related sustainability risks that may be used by the financial institutions to set targets and make those particular disclosures as part of the core business. I'll now hand it over to Rijit for the concluding slide. Over to you, Rijit. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Shorajit. I think the message is very clear that the financial institution has to play an active role in looking at nature and people related risks in the agri-commodity space, and there are different ways to do that. So what we are doing here is we are presenting a framework, and this framework incidentally is based on the task force for climate related financial disclosure. So it is aligned with what is expected at the international level. And as I also mentioned earlier, the focus right now by the government of India on promoting sustainable oil palm production in India also presents a great opportunity for financial institutions to take more interest on this topic and on this commodity, and proactively engage with with companies and project owners to sort of look at how the Indian palm oil production industry can from the beginning have a very strong sustainability principle embedded, and in addition to the businesses, of course, the financial institutions will play a very important role. So thanks once again for your patient hearing. I've already shared the link to the practitioners toolkit, and very happy to answer questions. Over to you, back to you, Sanjana. Thanks.
Thank you, Rijit. Thank you, Shurajit. I would now like to invite Shivnay Agarwal from the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil to take the case example of palm oil in order to look at the risks to the financial institution. Over to you, Shiv.
Thanks, Sanjana, and thanks IBA for organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank our partners CRB as well as Octus ESG for talking about the study we did. Yes, before I start, Sanjana, can I share my slides? Yeah.
Oh, yes, you can.
Or if you can share the slides that you have. Not able to share it from here.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah.
We'll share the slides. Just a second.
Yes. Meanwhile, the slides are being presented. I represent RSPO for the India market, and what I'll be talking about is the risk associated with the palm oil and how financial institutes can participate in the sustainable journey to ensure that palm oil is produced and consumed sustainably.
Are the slides visible?
I can't see them. Is it? Okay, it's if it's not working, I can just yeah, perfect.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Yes. So just to let you know that palm oil is just not a edible oil, but has a wider industry applications. If we talk about a day in our life, we actually use a lot of products which contain palm oil, from toothpaste to the shampoo, conditioners we use, in food, in a lot of flavoring agents. If you go eat outside any fast food, most of it is cooked in palm oil. The laundry is done through the basis of palm oil based chemicals. So what I'm trying to say is that palm oil is highly integrated in our everyday life. It's not just about cooking oil, but there is a lot of industries which use palm oil and palm oil derived ingredients. Next. And now, if we see where oil palm is cultivated, it's usually cultivated around the equator, 10 degrees north and 10 degrees south, which also happens to be the most biodiverse region on the planet. And hence, palm oil production in the tropics should not negatively impact the flora and fauna present there. Next, please. However, there has been sustainability issues which has been linked traditionally with palm oil, and they have been conventionally associated with deforestation, which leads to biodiversity loss. But we also see that there are a lot of social issues that are now coming up associated with palm oil, such as labor rights, decent living wage, on which we had to work towards ensuring that palm oil is cultivated sustainably. Next, please. And this may often we see that a lot of people would say, can't why don't we stop using palm oil, or we can just use some other oil instead of palm oil if palm oil is so bad. But we have to also delve a little deeper and understand why palm oil is so popular. And why it is so popular is because of the land efficiency that palm oil brings to the table. If you see in the slides, that 1 ton of palm oil requires 0.26 hectares of land. Whereas if you compare it with soybean oil, it requires 2 hectares of land to produce 1 ton of oil. So palm oil is a very land use efficient crop, and hence has been widely popular in terms of cultivation. Next, please. India is one of the largest importers of palm oil and is a user of palm oil. We out of our demand of almost 16 million metric tons of edible oils, 10 million metric tons is fulfilled by palm oil, and out of that, almost 9.3 metric tons is imported from Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. However, 90% of this palm oil is utilized in food and cooking, and 10% in the non-food sector. And there is an increasing consumption as well as import figures that we see in terms of palm oil year on year. Next slide, please. And this import bill is increasing as the consumption is increasing. Hence, the government has come up with the National Mission on Edible Oil, oil palm, which Rijit also touched upon. It's an initiative of our government to allocate around 1.4 billion US dollars towards boosting India's self-sufficiency in the edible oils, and also to deliver on its mandate for doubling farmer income. The area under cultivation is expected to increase by 1 million hectares by 2026, and double it in the next 5 years by 2030. Under this scheme, there are total 14 states that have been identified which will implement the scheme. And we have seen that Northeast as well as the southern states are the major focus areas under this. And I would also like to say that the scheme clearly mentions out that no forest land is recommended for oil palm cultivation. Rather, the scheme focuses on replacing other agro commodities with palm oil to increase the self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. So when we talk about financing and the action points for financial institutes in supporting this self-sufficiency scheme by the government of India, there would be a lot of domestic cultivation expansion in the country, and you can fund. There would be funding required for that, as well as the associated infrastructure for post-harvesting and transportation, as well as storage. Already, banks play a big role in terms of funding for the import of palm oil as a commodity from producing countries. There is also a lot of financial capital required for refining and processing of the crude palm oil, which it is supplied to further downstream players. A lot of consumer brands also need capital to create more products and more lines for both food and non-food products such as biscuits, snack food, cosmetics, home and personal care manufacturers. Next slide, please. As a financial institute, what are the risks associated when it comes to the exposure to companies or your clients who are in palm oil, who are involved in businesses which uses palm oil or palm oil derived ingredients? So this is from a study that has been done for Indonesia, but is again largely relevant for most countries. There are regulatory risks, reputational risks, and financial risks. When it comes down to regulatory risk pertaining to India, there is no domestic regulation on sustainable palm oil. However, we think the new BRSR disclosure, which was mentioned before this, will improve transparency in the sector. We have also seen that there has been a development in terms of foreign regulations, such as the EU due diligence around deforestation and the US Forest Act, which creates which the companies and the financial institutions need to be aware about and has to prepare so that the exposure is limited. Commitment around reduction that India has made, reduction of emissions, including scope 3. And then we are also participating in the net zero target. So these are the regulatory risks that we foresee in terms of financing for palm oil in India. There is also reputational risk for banks, which could be that palm oil sector is often associated with environmental and social issues. And we see increased customer awareness and campaigns by civil society around conventional palm oil. And hence, if the financial institute keep financing companies who don't procure or are not involved in the sustainable palm oil chain, then they are exposed to reputational risk. Also, there is a risk of underperformance of the investments in the unsustainable palm oil companies because they lack market access, the cost of sourcing increases, as well as the operations on the ground gets impacted due to various effects of climate change, which we see and are pretty evident year on year. Next slide, please. Now, to introduce RSPO, we are a non-profit international membership organization that unites stakeholders from the key sectors of the palm oil industry to promote the growth and use of sustainable palm oil through the standards that we create. Next slide, please. We have members all around the globe from 101 countries and now have reached around 5,558 members. Out of these, if you see on the right, these are our few members from the financial institute sector. So the RSPO membership is not just businesses and institutes and organizations who are involved in the palm oil supply chain directly, but indirectly as well, such as financial institutes, NGOs who come together to ensure that we create credible standards to make palm oil sustainable. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are just a few examples of the financial institution members of RSPO who have certain policies which highlight how companies should, how they see financing for palm oil related businesses, as well as we have also observed in the Indian market that there are non-member institutes as well who in their due diligence has a criteria that the company should be an RSP member and should be sourcing certified sustainable palm oil as a criteria for their financial products. Yeah, so that's a little bit about palm oil risk and associated with the financing, especially putting focus on India and what RSPO does about it through its members. Thank you so much. I can take any questions if there is.
Thanks, Shiv. Please, to all the participants, please keep including your questions in the chat box. We'll be taking all the questions towards the end of the sessions. I would now like to invite Mr. Karthik Iyer, CEO Human Ventures, to shed some light on the opportunities that exist for financial institutions by taking the case of turmeric farming. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjana. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much, Indian Bank Association and WWF for inviting me for this discussion. Little change over palm oil, and I just thought let me take some discussions on the turmeric side. I'm just sharing my slides here once again. Are the slides visible?
Yes, they're visible.
Okay, so just taking a cue from what Kamal said, in India, we are yet to get to that level where we are looking at farm optimization. So can there be a better time, to apply sustainable finance framework to when this entire agriculture is actually transitioning? I'll also touch upon the huge opportunity that the Indian banks have when we look at, the kind of challenging atmosphere that we have in the country, where every bank finds it so challenging to finance smallholder farmers because of various reasons. The experience of the bankers have been very poor with regard to marginal farmers lending, with regard to loan mafi and all this kind of things. So what I'll do is that I'll actually gather all these discussions that have happened and just try to see, how we have basically been able to achieve this success with initial success, I can say, with turmeric. Okay, Human Ventures is an agri-fintech. We work with small and marginal farmers, among the few organizations who actually extend last mile credit to marginal and small farmers. We have created a new template to finance this entire agriculture value chain. We think that over 5 crore farmers can achieve an income multiplier of over 10x over the current thing. The fact is that majority of the marginal farmers have this annual income of 15,000 rupees per acre per annum, and that is the extent of poverty. So what we have is a limited resource, which is the land. And if we can optimize this to increase this income by 10x, can there be a better way of how we can achieve the goals for the country? And this is the right time when we actually start with a sustainable finance framework while we incorporate this. So first, let us look at what are the barriers for us to create a sustainable agri-business ecosystem. The issue currently here is that all the marginal farmers, and I'm going to basically tell you on the next slide how many of them are marginal farmers. Actually, if you look at India from a marginal farmer perspective, most of them are actually producing at a micro level and selling at a micro level. I'm saying that the production happens at the farm gate, even the sale also happens at the farm gate by these people who are the aggregators. Now, unnecessarily, we have villainized these people, but they have a great role to play because they do the grading, sorting, pricing, forecasting, logistics, and they are the ones who basically get these commodities to modern trade or on the table or to the direct retail, as we say. But there have been a lot of price inefficiencies, and let us go back to the other side where the farmer is slating. Now, the issue with the marginal farmers is that the friend, philosopher, and guide of the marginal farmer is the neighboring farmer. There is no any specific institution who is coming and telling the farmer what to plant. My neighbor has planted jeera, I'll plant jeera. The neighboring farmer has planted cotton, I'll plant cotton. Now, whatever farmer A basically uses as input, or say crop care, or all those kind of standard operating processes repeated. So if one farmer does one mistake, this whole mistake is repeated across the sector. So let us first see what is the issue on the marginal farmer side. We say the poor quality input leads to a poor quality of output. And IBA did point out that we have, when it comes to rice or sugarcane, the amount of water that is being utilized is humongous. But can we see that just by drip irrigation, which is having very low penetration on one hand, and on other hand, where Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana is giving 80% subsidy, is going to reduce the water requirement to about 30% and giving almost 2 to 3 times the output. Can there be something better? Now let us go to the other part, which is very, very essential. If you have visited a grocery store, you would see that there are say, for example, if you take the case of chilies, you'll have 5 varieties of chilies costing from 250 rupees to 1,000 rupees. Why should a farmer even do a low cost chili, for that matter? So what we are saying is that what is basically different, creating a differentiation in the commodity is certification. Now, if the farmer's end producer is certified, what actually it results in is that it results into a higher realization of the value, because now we know that there's a certified product which is going to give a correct price realization for the farmer. Credit linkages are absolutely absent, because what actually happens is that the credit penetration is absolutely low. The issue is not about this entire thing playing out like this that has been playing out for so many years. The problem is that today we have moved to a data-led lending, not to a physical lending. So that's why the farm sector is lagging behind. We neither have data on what is being produced, we neither have data on what is being sold. So that's why when we write risk as, when we do the underwriting as bankers, we struggle when we write this kind of risk. Now, what is the, let us see the size of the opportunity or the size of the problem. 86% of the farmers in India are small and marginal farmers. We are talking about 13 crore farmers, out of which 10 crore farmers have got no access to formal base of lending. Isn't this a huge opportunity? But there's a challenge also. The challenge is that, they are all spread out. How does one even go and cover these farmers sitting in remote villages? The banks don't have basically branches that can actually go and cover all these farmers. So the consequence of doing business, the cost of doing business is humongous. What is the solution to that? That is something that I'm going to demonstrate in the next slide. So the opportunity is substantial. So opportunity is substantial because what actually happens is that almost 70% of this population is basically are having some kind of a inherent kind of issues. This opportunity itself is about 1 lakh crore, and we can actually put it in a subprime, category. But definitely they are fundable. We need to go through credit bureaus because we'll find out the other 30% who are not fundable. Now, what actually is driving this entire opportunity is first the certification of the produce. Now, it was mentioned that certification is coming at a high rate, but what happens is that when we create farmers at a part of programs wherein there are about 500, 600 farmers doing the similar kind of an activity, the produce can be certified. Now, once the produce gets certified, immediately what happens is that there are buyers who basically line up and say that because everybody wants a good quality of product and the right quantity of product. Price realization again drives the requirement for precision farming techniques like drip irrigation, because with ad hoc farming techniques, you can neither get the quality of produce and they cannot be certified. Now, this actually is creating a need for a lot of other proper agriculture input, like responsible use of fertilizers, responsible utilization of crop care thing. And resultantly, a marginal farmer, once their eyes are opened, once they try to see that, we can actually do 10x in the same 1 acre land, they are basically rewarded, and then it's win-win situation for everyone. Now, what actually happens is the yield increases, the realization of price goes up, and we think that from 1/10 of 15,000, 20,000 rupees per acre per annum, farmer can easily get to about 2 lakh acre. And here I'm talking about profits and not only realization. So what is this new template for with resilience and sustenance for the entire value chain? To first put a sustainable finance portfolio, everybody has to be given an opportunity. So what actually happens is that, the first thing that one has to do is put a framework along things saying that how we can create a policy for sustainable finance. Like, for example, can we fund certain programs, like say, we discussed about palm, or now we can look at turmeric as a, as a commodity and try to understand it completely. Every bank understands how a power plant is financed, how a construction project is financed. Can we also understand how a commodity can be financed? And I think that is the right start to that. We can put a timeline saying that, okay, this is when this policy is going to be adhered to. We can fix accountability. It can actually go through proper auditing and reporting. All these metrics can be measured and this can be replicated. This is how we can create. So other thing what we do is that the first thing, as we say, is the first step to start is that with financial inclusion, let us actually give the farmers affordable credit and ensure that end use is confirmed, so that the money is not basically, instead of buying rhizomes for turmeric, the farmer doesn't end up buying mobile phones. Monitoring of the end use and cash entrapment. And I think these are the three questions that a banker would like to ask. A program approach brings in a kind of a kind of a confinement of, say, 1 acre land. What are the farming practices? What are the input materials? And hundreds and thousands of farmers can become a part of this kind of a program. Obviously, there is when we are creating a program, we could put all these matrices as a part of SOP, where we look at a positive impact on the environment. What are the outcomes which are actually causing this, motivation to replicate this success and commercial viability? So just next 5 minutes on this, I would like to demonstrate to any bank how we are building a 150 crore turmeric portfolio. I don't even know how many bankers would have actually thought that turmeric can actually give such a big portfolio. So let me demonstrate this. So we are working with hundreds of farmers currently, which can actually replicate to thousands of farmers. We are currently working in Odisha. State Bank of India motivated us to take up this whole program. So what actually happens is, let us see that once we get about 500 farmers as a part of the portfolio, or as a part of the program, all of them would basically take 1 acre of land, plant X number of rhizomes, and get Y amount of output out of that, and also get into certifications. So 15,000 farmers, 1 lakh kind of a KCC loan would be about 150 crore portfolio. We do the product design as per the harvest, and basically design this product. When the farmer gets harvest, we can actually do the loan repayment. We arrange for all input materials, including drip irrigation, the kind of mulching practices that the farmer has to divide, and we exactly know what could be the output that will come from 1 acre of land. Now, the most important thing is that to find a buyer upfront, for this entire produce. The buyers are attracted because we have uniform farming practices and we know what is the planting material that goes in. So even before the plantation has been done, we get buyer commitments on this. Then after that, we work with our ground partners. We create Gram Sabhas, we educate the farmers and onboard these farmers. These SOPs are given to this government organization who facilitate with, giving the measurements or basically doing the monitoring on the ground. And once the product is done, we facilitate the entire products, and after testing, certification, etc. And now with this demonstration, we have about 2x to 5x kind of additional farmers who will join this thing. So what actually happens is that it's a very sustainable way of how we are looking at it, either from a farmer level or from a bank level, from an environment level, or even from a buyer level, or even from a consumer level. So it's about a 360-degree kind of a approach. So what are the results that came out of that is that, if you see, farmer takes 6 to 9 months risk by growing turmeric. There was a person who used to basically mix all these varieties of turmeric and basically sell it to the market at a wholesale level, not doing certifications. We all know that a commercial variety of turmeric, which is, as we call it, Salem, has got about 3.5% curcumin content. The best in India comes from Meghalaya, 7.5% curcumin content. When we tested this, and why certification is so important is because when we tested this turmeric in Odisha, we basically work in a very backward district called as Kannamal. The curcumin content turned out to be 10.9%, which basically means that now it need not be used in our masala, but it can be used for nutraceuticals or even pharma companies. So this is where a turmeric basically, which is getting sold at 50-55 rupees per kg, has a potential to get sold at 200 rupees per kg. Now what has suddenly happened is that, okay, now the farmers know that, okay, I have to follow the right techniques, segregate the products, do the certification, because price realization is 4x and not 1x. And by proper techniques, like say mulching and drip irrigation, the consumption of water is quite low. and the output is 2x to 2.5x. So it is basically double whammy or on the production side and 4x increase. So what typically happens is that farmer tends to make anywhere between 2.5 lakh to 3 lakh rupees per acre per annum. So this is what we are saying, that once there is a program approach, we can induct farmers, we can give them training, we can, in this entire project, we basically embed this credit, and that's how we go further. And most importantly, what actually happens is that we get a harvest in the production calendar. So if we had done the sowing by say June, we exactly know that by March or April, the production is going to come, and we have a last year certification. We can show that to the buyers and immediately get a price contract for the buyer. So this is where our presence in agri ecosystem. We work in sericulture, turmeric, chilies. We have done a very good cluster development in Marathwada. We changed the farmers who were growing probably soya to chilies, who have basically realized about 2 lakh rupees within 6 months. We definitely believe that all these things, through a program approach will be possible. So yeah, so this is what we do, and very happy to take any questions. Just as the last slide, as a part of this rapid economic transformation, we embed all these things inside the program, which is on sustainable agriculture, year-round farming. All the stuff that we do is mostly organic. We ask the farmer to do climate resilient practices. Most of the projects are going to be carbon sequestering, because we know that climate finance is going to come to India very quickly, and we need to adhere to the sustainable development goals. And most of the projects have to be ESG compliant. We also learned from WWF that, if we put a gender lens, there are again a lot of funds which can basically fund. With women, we have got an alternate source of credit. So when we pull all these things together, we can do a great job with regard to creating programs after programs and inducting thousands and thousands of farmers from this. Thank you so much. Very happy to take questions from here.
Thank you so much, Karthik. So that's the end of the sessions and the presentations. So we have some time. We're happy to take questions. I request all the participants to please keep sharing their questions in the chat box. In the meanwhile, Karthik, we have a few questions. We can start with you. So according to your model, how can increased farmer incomes lead to more sustainable agricultural practices, and how can banks as a partner institution support in this uptake? If you would like to share some insights on that.
Yeah, so the first mantra to this is that farming income will only increase with sustainable agriculture, because the present means of agriculture, like sir pointed out, with regard to flood irrigation versus drip irrigation, it's about 70% saving on the water content, and probably 2 to 2.5 times increase in the overall output. So sustainable agriculture is the only way how you can increase farm income, because it has to be sustainable. It's not that it's like 1 year wonder. And how can banks benefit from that is that once we create a program, there are a lot of disincentives for the farmer to basically to default. Why the banks are not why the banks are not very enthusiastic to fund individual farmers is because there are three basic problems. There is no way a bank can figure out how is the end use being utilized, or probably there are no means and mechanisms to find out. As a part of the program, we exactly say where the money will go, and one has to find out what are the proofs that this money is being basically utilized for the purpose that has been intended. The second thing, most important thing, is that end use monitoring. So like you have planted something, but the crop has gone away. Again, the banker's money is not going to come back. So as a part of the program, there are insurance covers. There are a lot of other mechanisms through which we can protect not only farmers' livelihood, but also the bank's income. One of the most important things is that, say, for example, you have done a plantation somewhere in say, a remote part of India, and you generally know that, okay, a rain has come in a particular part of the country, part of the village. Some parts are destroyed, some parts are not destroyed. Now, how does it happen? As a part of the program, the affected areas are pointed to the bank so that the loan restructuring can happen well in advance. Secondly, there is also an insurance cover on top of it, so farmers' livelihoods are protected. As a part of the program, now the banks or financial institutions have got access to thousands of acres of farmers who are doing identical farming with kind of a 1 acre kind of mechanics. So it is easier for the banks to basically do this control mechanism with price cash entrapment, because there is also a guaranteed buyback, from a potential buyer. So from every issues like end-use confirmation, end-use monitoring, and cash entrapment. This whole program kind of a framework helps the banks to basically, whether it is turmeric, whether it is chilies, or it is palm oil, it is going to facilitate the banks to basically have a renewed look, towards this sector.
So I can see that there are more questions coming directed to you, sir. So you were talking about the project that you've done in Orissa. There's a question regarding that. If there's anything similar that's been done in any other state apart from Orissa, and if you would like to share some thoughts about your upcoming projects, and if where bankers can assist or fund in any way.
Yeah, so we are see Odisha, or if you say Odisha, or you have the other great example of Meghalaya. Of course, what we are trying to do is that they are actually growing gold. They were not knowing that for the last 300 years that they are growing gold, and they were basically selling it in the market like a commodity. So just one intervention with a certification certainly opened their eyes, saying that, oh, probably we could basically give it to the nutraceutical sector. So we will be replicating this across states while we work with 50 farmers in Marathwada. We are replicating this with in Madhya Pradesh. We are working with government of Madhya Pradesh, where we are going to do with about 500 farmers. And this is also a very small cluster which can extend to about 5,000 farmers. We'll soon work with for the Rabi plantation. We did red chilies Rabi plantation, where we had this program saying "6 mahine mein Lakpati." So that's how you motivate the farmers as well, to basically, end of the day, the farmer has to work hard, and if 50 farmers can demonstrate that they can become Lakpatis in 6 months, we don't see a reason. So the motivation actually comes from their wives, who keep pushing the farmers, saying that, why don't you increase this incomes? Again, I'll keep saying that, the probability of default is quite low, because what happens is that immediately for the next season, the farmer is looking for some credit facilities. And the farmer knows that there is a great amount of disincentive for if I default, the bank is not going to give me loan, and the neighboring farmer is going to earn about 2 to 3 lakh rupees. So this is basically creating a kind of framework. So other projects that we are working on is a flagship project that we are developing around micro goatry, and this is aimed at women. So generally, when we work with tribal farmers, we see that there is a tradition to keep goats. We are just putting a method to this, wherein we are creating a shelter for these goats and putting IoTs, so that a bank can track all their assets live, wherever the goats are. The very clear thing is that it is 5 female goats with 1 male goat who reproduce and form about 14 goats, out of which, even if they sell 12 goats at 7 to 10,000 rupees, it's about 70,000 rupees income for the wife, of the farmer. So we also are giving, while I spoke to you about gender lens, there is an alternate form of, the bankers need not look at your traditional, financing modes of, say, like your KCC or something. We can do it as a part of self-help group and others. So far, like bankers have got a lot of, loan portfolios through which they can give, but often they are limited because they are not organized. So when we put a little bit of a method and create programs out of this, it is beneficial. We are also working on this concept called Har Khet Mein Goshala, wherein again it is not directed towards dairy farmers. We are encouraging farmers to keep 2 cows or 2 buffaloes, where we can use the manure to basically as farmyard manure. It's a very critical input. And while we talk about regenerative agriculture here, we are trying to get a financial model in place where a manure can actually replace the milk, so that even if the farmer doesn't milk the cows, the manure should basically do the magic with regard to cash flows and increase the produce. So variety of projects that we are working on, these are all programs that we create, and we basically pilot it out with, say, 100, 200 farmers, which can be replicated across the country. Of course, we need to look at agroclimatic zones, and a lot of science basically goes through it to what to cultivate, not to cultivate.
Thank you, sir. So there are a lot of questions that are coming for you. I would request the participants to get in touch with Karthik on a bilateral level, because in the interest of time, we'll just take a couple of other questions. There was a question for RSPO. Shiv, if you could share and shed some light on how to assess the risk of greenwashing in relation to palm oil.
Yeah, so that's what we do through our standards. So our standards are actually prepared with consultation of our members, and we use third-party accredited certification bodies to certify these facilities. So RSPO don't certify them directly. That's how we assure that whatever they're doing is sustainable and it's not greenwashing. So that's the RSPO system, and that's the RSPO associate assurance system. That's how you can be assured if someone is RSPO certified, it's not greenwashing, and they're actually contributing to sustainable palm oil. One more point to be added, that when members procure RSP certified oil, it also leads to conservation of forest. It also leads to avoiding of labor issues. It also provides the smallholders as well as scheme smallholders and other stakeholders involved in the cultivation of oil palm with decent living wage. So if you are procuring RSP certified oil, it contributes to actual impact on the ground and not greenwashing.
Thanks, Shiv. So we'll just take one last question. I'll address it to Rajat and Surajit. In order for banks to systematically address the climate and nature-related financial risks, there is a need for guidance on forward-looking scenarios. Can you share some examples on the global progress that has been done on this front, and if anything can be extrapolated for the Indian scenario?
So I can take that, Shorji, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So in the practitioner's guide, we have provided some cases of from some other jurisdictions of what is happening in agri-commodities finance. So that's one possibility. The other is that please look into the work of the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, and also the work of the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. These are being sort of very aggressively being promoted and adopted by the international financial institutions, and that will give an idea of how it could be applied. It is not something which is it's a universal sort of formula, and it's a universal framework which can be applied across different jurisdictions, and creates that kind of a consistent sort of framework globally. So if the Indian Banking Association and the members here can start to look at the work of the TCFD and the TNFD, I think that would be very good. That will also help us in preparing for this the kind of expectations that financial institutions in India will have to sort of meet going forward. And also just one quick sort of comment on the point about greenwashing. So the greenwashing is already covered by Indian jurisdiction as an unfair trade practice. Earlier, it was with there was this sort of confusion between whether it should come under the Competition Act, but now it is being covered under the Consumer Protection Act, and the Central Consumer Protection Authority has been given the responsibility to address greenwashing. So if there is a case of greenwashing, it can be directed to the Central Consumer Protection Agency of Government of India. Thanks.
Thanks, Rajat. I do understand that we have gone a little overboard with our time, so I would just like to invite Mr. Vishal Dev, Director Sustainable Business at WWF India, to close and provide his remarks in order to close the sessions. Vishal, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanjana. To start with, I would like to thank Indian Bank Association for this opportunity to all of us to speak on the matter, which has not been much spoken about, because deforestation and conversion-free finance is something new which is getting into India, and world over, a lot of banks and financial institutions have already started focusing towards it. Why I'm saying so? Because much of the effort in the country has been done towards mitigation and adaptation, while deforestation being such a critical issue, all those gains which has been garnered toward those initiatives would be lost if we don't look towards this. Having said that, we saw during our discussion that going ahead frameworks would be playing critical role, at least for the banks, to get an assurance that sustainability is ingrained. Of course, banks will have to increase their capacity of understanding the sector and the value chain. And in the process, these frameworks will add a support system. So I would like to thank the speakers, especially HSBC, Ms. Aloka, who has been very supportive in this initiative, total initiative of palm oil, and she spoke on the matter. I would like to thank Kamal, who is the head of global palm oil team in WWF, for being here for this topic and addressing how globally this matter is being addressed. I would like to thank Rijit and Surajit, who presented on the framework, which will, of course, be a guide for the financial institutions. And we will share this deck after this meeting with IBA, and IBA will, of course, be sharing with the members. I would like to say thank Karthik as well, and he has been able to, raise a lot of enthusiasm among many of the participants. I think they would be bilaterally reaching them out in this very interesting sector of lending to farmers. So here we come to the closure, and of course, Shiv from RSPO. RSPO has been a great supportive, have been playing a great supportive role in this complete initiative of palm oil. They are the unique stakeholder, bring a framework, and of course increasing the capacity of the stakeholders throughout the value chain. So thanks, Shiv, for being there and speaking on that. So here we come to the closure, and thank you all.
I think it's a time to thank all the participants, all the speakers, organizations, WWF, who has kindly arranged this program for bankers. It was very interesting, very participative. We can look at the number of questions being asked, and it has, very encouraging also. Some of the things are there which bankers would like to experiment with. So thanks to all of you once again for participation and active sharing in this. Sharing of information. Thanks to WWF team and other participants. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Just one more thing to add, actually. Just demonstrates how much of science is going into something basic as agriculture. Okay, really kudos to Karthik. Actually, it was a very entertaining session, Karthik.
So this presentation, I think we have recorded and we'll be placing it on YouTube if we have concurrence of WWF. So bankers, if they want, they can see it later also. Maybe some people have missed this session, so they can have a look at it. So this will be available on our YouTube channel. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.